4 years ago this week, PC Blakelock was killed on the Broadwater Farm estate. Now a controversial police raid has put the North London estate in the news again, but questions about the media's involvement were also centre stage. Should journalists have accepted the police's invitation to witness the event? Is the relationship between the media and the police getting dangerously cosy? The media show talked to journalists, broadcasters and local representatives to find out.
We know what the raid was about. It was to show you a show of strength. It was to show us how sophisticated they have come over the last 4 years. Let's put on bulletproof vests that we know we don't need, because when all the surveillance was going on, there was no guns. Let's put on bulletproof vests that we don't need. Let's grab some media people that we don't really need, because they'll print anything we say afterwards anyway. But if they're there at the time, it'll even look that much more impressive. Do you all understand?
At 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of September, around 400 police raided Broadwater Farm estate. On the evidence of police surveillance videos, they were looking for drugs and drug dealers. But the police were not alone. Selected news media had been invited to observe the whole operation.
We had a call at about 4:30 on Friday afternoon from LWT News, and they wanted to know if there was a police raid taking place at that moment on Broadwater Farm. I phoned our local housing office on the farm, who told me that it was a very quiet, normal Friday afternoon. So I didn't think much more of it, but just in case, I thought I'd check on my way home. So I drove home by Broadwater Farm, and as I got near the farm, it was fairly apparent that something big was about to happen. I drove past police in side streets in cars, police on horses, and then as I got nearer to the farm, there were two large furniture lorries being driven by two men who looked rather like policemen.
And that's it. The doors of this unmarked lorry are open and the police are out and running into the estate. And I'm following them. Some are in full riot gear and carrying crowbars, axes and sledgehammers. Others are protected with body armour, stab and bulletproof vests.
I just finished work, man! What are you in the army for? I just finished work, you leave me alone!
Angry protests here from the arrests. The first arrests as the police come in. And below me I can see riot police coming out of the vans, obviously ready to break into the properties they've targeted.
200 police in new raid on London's Broadwater Farm. Good evening. 200 policemen have carried out drug raids on the Broadwater Farm estate in North London. 4 years ago, the estate was the scene of a riot in which Police Constable Keith Blakelock was murdered. Scotland Yard say today's raids were targeted against specific cannabis and cocaine dealers. They say they couldn't tolerate the abuse of drug laws.
This huge operation began early this morning at the Metropolitan Police's Hendon Training Centre. The 200 officers who assembled there were briefed about the target by the man who would lead them in. They told his officers that the raid followed consultations with community leaders at Broadwater Farm.
This was a massive policing operation which has been some considerable time in the planning. At 5 p.m, several unmarked removal vans drove onto the estate and scores of officers, many in riot gear, poured onto the first-floor terrace of Tangmere Block, which police say is the focus of drug dealing on the estate. Within seconds, I saw a number of suspects being detained.
The raid had been organised for over a month. More recently, the police had offered a group of journalists the opportunity to come in with them. They invited reporters from ITN, BBC Television and Radio, the Press Association, IRN Local Radio and the Hornsey Journal. But why did the police decide to take the media along?
We were seeking to provide the public with powerful, independent, first-hand witnesses who would be able to put forward what they saw and what they'd been told and what judgments they had come to as quickly as possible to dispel rumour, to allay unnecessary fears. So we naturally looked to broadcasters.
But some journalists were one step ahead of the police.
I had heard through a source about 3 weeks ago But it was made clear to me that it was ultra secret, so I kept it to myself, didn't even tell my editor about it. Since I knew about it, they were obliged to take me, and I then discovered that the News of the World had also found out, so they came along too.
We were rung up and asked to go around and discuss this matter with them. We didn't know what it was until we got there. The public relations director outlined what he could and couldn't tell us at that point, and at the end of it basically asked us whether we would like to go with them, wherever they were going.
I had a call the previous day, which was to ask me to go to a briefing at Scotland Yard, which I then duly did. And that briefing lasted for about an hour and was really an explanation of what was about to happen. There was no exact location given or other details, but it was the fact that there was a major police operation and we were to be offered a facility, obviously on certain terms, and the conversation was largely about those terms and conditions, which were subsequently then put into a written form, an undertaking which we signed.
Thank you for coming to see us. I am now writing to confirm the terms of our agreement. We have agreed to provide you with a special facility to report a major police operation, including the briefing and transport of officers and the operation itself. We explained that much of what we could agree to be reported before the conclusion of trials would necessarily be circumscribed by the needs of justice and the need to protect confidential intelligence material.
We were told to be at Scotland Yard at 7 a.m. on Friday morning. When I arrived there, I discovered that the TV crews and those who'd been invited by the yard had no idea where they were going or what they were doing. Secrecy was total at that point. I obviously knew, and the News of the World man knew.
The agreement imposed strict rules upon the journalists, who now included the gatecrashers, the Mail on Sunday and News of the World among their number. They were held incommunicado at Hendon Police Training Centre until later that day.
When we got to the training centre, we were allowed to actually go into the briefing itself and see everything that the senior officers there were seeing. There was 100 senior officers, we saw everything.
When all of you have gone home, my officers will once again be patrolling the estate. We will be held accountable for the actions of every single officer on duty today.
About 2:30 in the afternoon, we were moved out to various vans and vehicles and moved to a sports ground elsewhere in North London, nearer to Tottenham.
But by the middle of the afternoon, other journalists were already beginning to assemble on Broadwater, alerting some residents with inquiries about a police raid.
The press were then loaded into a large removal van with one of the assault teams. We drove to a forward rendezvous point, and the inspector on board told us that we must be completely silent. We were parked somewhere in a road. We could hear traffic going by, we could hear shoppers talking on the pavement. We had to be totally silent because we were close to the farm. We were in the Tottenham area.
We were in that vehicle for, well, it must have been perhaps half an hour while they actually got ready to raid the estate. They were talking to each other over their radios, and eventually they got the signal to go in. And we went in, the doors opened, and I followed them. I went in with the riot police. I was following them up the stairs, giving a live commentary, recording it as I came out of the truck, and actually got onto the deck, which is the centre of the Broadwater Farm. So I was recording a commentary onto a cassette, which I later filed as soon as the radio car, we have a radio car, arrived at the estate.
By 5:30, the raid was effectively over. 37 people had been detained, half of whom were later charged. Small quantities of cocaine and around £1.5 pounds of cannabis had been discovered. The rest of the media had also arrived in force. But to what extent had the operation been a staged event?
There was certainly an air of almost theatricality about the whole thing. It was heavy with melodrama. The police clearly felt that this was a very important operation, the recapturing, if you like, of Broadwater Farm after what happened 4 years ago. It was symbolic for them.
I think that you can go back to the words of Lord Scarman when he said that extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary measures. This was an extraordinary circumstance. I think if an operation of this sort came up again, I see nothing in what we did on Friday that moves me to believe that we should not do it again.
The media themselves have now been used, and they should look at it. They should look at it from the other way, and they should stand up and say, well, why did the police invite us along? For what reason?
I think it's inevitable that more and more institutions in this country have cottoned on to the idea that as they're going to be covered by radio, press and TV, that they're going to have to come to some kind of accommodation with the media and use it to their advantage. I mean, everyone does that. It's not just the police. And the questions are tougher ones for us.
What we are talking about improving relations is actually improving levels of confidence between the media and the police, that they understand what each other do, and improving and it's dispelling misunderstandings about the nature of each other's jobs.
Dramatic police raids are not the norm on British television, but in other countries, high-profile police operations are not such a rarity.
I suspect the idea has probably come from America, where this sort of coverage is widespread. Indeed, on American television, some police raids are carried live in their totality, and I believe are quite popular viewing. But there probably is no doubt it has come from America, and I'm sure we haven't seen the last of it.
I'm sure there are many people in the police who rather fancy the style of some of those operations over the Atlantic, would like to feel they were part of that. I'm not sure that it's helpful, simply because it does make people very cynical that all this is about is public relations and a media circus.
There have been, as I think in general, more crews going out on more raids with the British police. But I don't think we're anywhere near the way it is in the States, where local television stations are covering crime stories day in and day out in extraordinary detail. That isn't the case in Britain. This is one development which one might say has been copied from the States, but I don't think it's of a massive scale.
We were never compelled to run the story from the police point of view. There's a difference, I think, between cooperating with the police in offering a facility like this, and then in some forms of journalism, that is then taken to mean coercion and collusion. That wasn't the case. It was cooperation with the police, and we saw it from the police side. That doesn't mean to say that subsequently the coverage was biased towards the police in any way whatsoever. The reporter formed their own view. They happened to go in with the police. We subsequently talked to a large number of people on the estate and subsequently also broadcast their views of the operation, some of which were greatly in favour, some of which were against.
The media was used to legitimise that exercise. The exercise itself was a total failure, and the media should now be big enough to stand up and say, yes, we was used by the Metropolitan Police for a Public Relations Act, and to take steps that doesn't happen again.
You appear to be an arm of the police if you're not careful. I mean, this is a real danger. It's entirely appropriate that the police should be more open. I mean, people complain when the police are not open, and they have a dilemma. But if you appear with the police in their vans by the side of their men, all too often you simply seem to be part of the whole raid itself, rather than observers.
We are all, crime reporters and newspapers in this country, very supportive of the police and very supportive of law and order. We do not want, whilst there is competition between us, we want good exclusive stories all the time. We never want to write a story which will jeopardise a police operation, which will cause months of work to go out of the window.
A professional journalist should be a professional sceptic. I mean, if anyone is offering you a photo opportunity of any kind, one has to ask oneself, well, what's in it for them? Whether it's somebody who's launching a new set of dresses, or somebody says, come with me on a raid to Broadwater Farm. The question really is the news value and the issue of editorial independence.
I don't think that senior editors would send journalists to this sort of facility if they felt that their independence was being compromised. At the end of the day, editors send people on these facilities with lots of other resources at their disposal to find out from other people what their side of the story is. They know at the end of the day that the public will judge them on what they see. They know that their peers will judge them on what they see.
It was very dramatic radio, because when you go in with that large number of men and dressed the way that they were and the nature of the operation, in terms of radio, it was very exciting radio.
I find it very worrying, simply because one wonders whether the future police operations are going to be more concerned with camera angles and photo opportunities and the good story, rather than the reality of police operations, which ought to be about dealing with serious law and order problems, and dealing with problems of serious drugs, which we were told this was all about.
Quite simply, as a journalist, your job is to take out news, to print news, and to give the views in an equal and balanced way. Now, if you jumping out of a van with the police, running up the stairs behind the police, taking the pictures that the police are allowing you to take, right, is going to be equal, just and unbalanced, and you feel you're doing your job properly, well, then I can say no more. What I would say is that a journalist should be looking for the truth. A journalist should be looking for the reality of the situation and not the reality of what somebody's putting on a plate in front of them.